I'm Francesca Donnellan. Welcome to Becoming More Human, the podcast. Every generation, through its arts and creativity, explores the same questions. Who am I, and what really matters? We are so often taught how to emulate others, to make other people happy. But how do we access what's good for ourselves and be strong enough to actually claim it? It's a constant practice because we all keep evolving. There are no limits to personal growth. You can start your journey today and get closer to discovering your true self. Give back to the people around you and make the world a better place.
Hello listeners, on today's episode, I'm talking with Leigh Trescott, a breakup coach, advice columnist and podcast host of Thank You, Heartbreak. Chelsea sees breaking points as our greatest opportunity to wise up, rise up and become meaningful, relatable human beings who are stronger in love, life and character. With this pursuit in mind, she's devoted to helping her clients and listeners break upward. In the face of change and heartbreak of any kind, this episode is packed full of wisdom and a fresh perspective to look at heartbreak, and not just the romantic kind. So enough from me, and let's jump straight in.
Well, I say that my longest relationship is with New York City. So I live in New York City. It's my happy place. And I'm a breakup coach. But my whole kind of premise around that is breaking upward. So that was always like the motto that came into my head. So it's not just about relationships ending. It's about aspects of ourselves that we need to break up with and to kind of advance us, elevate us to the next stage of our life. I also have a podcast called Thank You, Heartbreak, and that goes beyond romantic heartbreak as well. It's topics like, addiction, recovery, someone in a family that died. Oh my God, I've interviewed people that have had accidents where they lost 3 limbs. And so it really covers it all, but it's, how are we grateful for the transformation? And also my whole thing, which relates to your podcast, is how does heartbreak turn us into more meaningful and relatable human beings? But yeah, about me, when I first left for college, it's just crazy. I think that was the first year away is kind of what set me on a track ultimately to have the profession that I have. And it wasn't just heartbreak romantically. It was the way that I broke my own heart. And I started using relationships to what I thought was to save me or to prevent me from turning on myself. So my first year of college, I felt so isolated. I realized how much I had relied on my reputation in the past to kind of buoy me through life. And, this was starting all over, and I hadn't gotten into the school I wanted. I wasn't living in New York yet. I ended up transferring the next year, but I was in Boston, and it wasn't what I wanted with my life. And I couldn't accept it. And I thought, well, if this, if the first year of college isn't going to change me, if I don't have friends that are influencing me, what can I do to finally overcome a challenge in my life that has held me back? And that was my feeling about my body. Though that was crazy, I've always had, I guess, body dysmorphia. And I had always been kind of chasing what I thought was the peak of my life when I was a model, thinking that if I looked a certain way, I would feel a certain way and I would be free again. So I ended up with an eating disorder, and quickly, it's just crazy. It's like you can try to lose weight in a healthy way and it won't happen. Yeah. But the moment that you again, turn on yourself, I became 80 pounds very quickly.
Wow.
I thought that if I had just had a relationship, because I ended up breaking up with someone right before then, and I thought, oh my God, if there had been a man in my life, I never would have let that happen. I can't afford to be alone again. So I went throughout my whole 20s going from one long distance relationship to the next because I was moving a lot because of education, and I didn't know anyone in these places. So I was in long distance relationships. And what ultimately happened was in grad school, it was like this full circle moment where I was reading from my thesis. And part of it was in that thesis about overcoming my eating disorder. And the next day I went to a psychiatrist. I was finally going to help myself. So many mentors had told me along the way, like, hey, I'm concerned. maybe you should pull out of school for a bit. And I just refused. I refused to take antidepressants. I thought that was weak. And yet I was addicted to things like Adderall. I mean, it should be productive, but the idea of being unhappy was just unacceptable. So I went to the psychiatrist, and the first thing he said to me was like, I cannot help you because you're anorexic. And I was shocked.
Wow.
It was like, oh my God. And I remember that, like, during my phase of anorexia, people wouldn't help me. Professionals like mocked me. People really feared me at that time in my life. I mean, I swear to God, I would go to doctors and like get blood drawn, right, to check on my health. And nurses would say things like, your jewelry weighs more than you do. And I remember even when I gained weight, which kind of like contributed to so much of this obsession around this and this heartbreak around my body. Yeah. But when I was modeling, I ended up taking birth control to help with my acne. And I gained weight like 10 or 15 pounds in a month. And I remember the doctor at the time saying that like, I was like, I must be eating like a horse or something. Like, I don't even, it was something crazy. It's like there was no sensitivity around your body changing. And I felt so helpless when I went to that psychiatrist. But the thing was the fact that he said I was anorexic, and I believed, no, I'm not doing what I used to do. I'm not. And he put me on a scale, and I was 100 pounds. And it was the anxiety of my life and the heartbreak of what I was doing and how isolated I had become and the relationship I was in. And it was all these things, but it was humiliating at the time for me to think that here I was standing at a podium in front of a whole group talking about overcoming something when on the outside it didn't look like I had overcome anything at all. And the reality was that, I was in a worse place in many ways than when I was anorexic because I couldn't even pinpoint the problem anymore. And I think that because I'm telling you, I mean, quarantine was a crazy moment because I remember self-isolating and kind of quarantining myself. Yeah. So it was the hardest thing to overcome. Harder than the eating disorder was overcoming, trapping myself in my apartment, pulling away from the world and forgetting how to speak. And so me becoming a breakup coach, I remember this moment when I was so paralyzed by life and my twin sister was going into rehab and it was just like, whoa, what has happened to us? And I thought, oh my God, if only I had someone, I swear, I was like, if only I had someone like a breakup coach that I could reach my hand out for, because I was the type of person that made my boyfriend into my whole world. And I was like, if someone could reach their hand out to me and just help me look at how this wasn't wasted time. My relationship wasn't wasted time to forgive myself for staying so long. And so thanks to my twin sister going into recovery and us having a place where my family could be more honest about how we really were. I got on an antidepressant. I started reading spiritual books and I just pushed into this new way of being where I could, feel, but I could even become someone that could be a breakup coach. And it's been a journey to get to that place. But that's what happened.
And in that time when you were going through that heartbreak and you were feeling that ultimately a man in your life would fix problems and make everything okay, where do you think that comes from inside of you? Where do that feeling of somebody else making you whole and filling that void? Because so many of us do go through that feeling where, a partner, a romantic partner completes us, and it's quite often you hear that saying, he's my other half.
You hear it all the time. I don't know if I believe that anymore. I think that's the delusions, and that's kind of like the easy way out. And I think that there's a lot of the romanticizing is that if someone is in my life and witnessing me so closely, I will have to become better in front of them. They will finally be the motivation to step it up. Or, if I don't have certain qualities, but they do, I will naturally just take on those qualities. But I think a lot of it in my life was the idea that if I had someone witnessing me, that I would be better.
Right.
But how I'm being when I'm alone
with yourself, you'll be,
yeah.
That's really interesting. It's almost like a parent type figure that you need in your life to help keep you in check.
And what's hard is, by not addressing it sooner, it stayed inside me for longer. But I think it is the whole idea of how do you care for yourself? How do you parent yourself? How do you reparent yourself? And I think I just always have tried to figure it out on my own. Which is a very difficult thing when you're so wounded or so scared of really touching the core issue. And so, a lot of people that are off on their own or trying to adult, or they leave their house for the first time, or don't even come from a house where people were parenting them, you're left to your own devices. I think that was a really jarring thing. I was always nervous about that. I was always nervous about leaving my parents. And, being responsible for ourselves. There's a real power in being responsible for ourselves. I mean, that's where all our power lies. Yeah. But there's also a lot of fear that comes with it because it's on our shoulders. And I think what happens is if we're not proud of what's happening in our lives, there's so much shame that we can carry that this is our fault. And we can look at the world, especially in today's world, and we can look into other people's lives, Instagram, all of that. And we can say everyone else has figured out how to do this. And I secretively am struggling to even, motivate myself to leave my place to go out into the world. And that was a big thing for me. When I moved back to New York City, it was like, oh my God, I have to learn how to go out into the world and introduce myself again. And I used to shake when I was around people. And listen, I was like the biggest extrovert growing up. I never struggled with this. But it's about like, I think so many of us, when we think about transformation, we want it to happen like this. We want to take a leap and be there immediately. And we're so uncomfortable with the discomfort of ourselves. And so we have to remember that it's a practice. For me, it's really been the small steps along the way that have really given me momentum, and that has lasted. It's like pills are a quick fix, but they don't do anything. But small little things are what change us over time, but it takes time, and we have to have patience for ourselves, and we have to have belief in where we're leading ourselves, even if we don't see it immediately.
How much do you feel that in your story in particular and in your profession in this area of heartbreak, especially as we're talking in context of the romantic type of relationship in this instance, how often do you think we stay in the fantasy side of a relationship rather than the reality?
Too much of it. I mean, I think the majority of time is spent there. What I've noticed is, there's either people that are thinking toward the future, like, okay, oh my God, once they ask me to move in with them, that will mean this. I will find out that they're devoted to me and I can just get comfortable. Once I get an engagement ring, it will mean this, and I can relax and I know that my future is being taken care of. Or, and this happens all the time, it's the biggest thing I see, is that people romanticize the beginning of the relationship and they so badly want to return to what it was in the beginning, when someone was in full pursuit of you, when someone, attention was lasered on you. I think that in the beginning of a relationship, so many endorphins happen where we become bigger than ourselves because we think love is here. It's just that rush. And then slowly over time, we kind of go back into almost who we were before we met that person. And we become uncomfortable about that. We think something has changed. So rather than addressing how life does change, and that's realistic, we romanticize the past and try to get back there, circle back, or we romanticize, okay, well, in the future, when this happens, when thinking. And oh my God, I mean, it's, one of the greatest tragedies is, living in the past, but really living in the future too, where we think that, it doesn't just happen in romance. It's like once we get a certain title, once we start making a certain amount of money, once we paint our apartment, once we get a better couch, it's just like that we will suddenly step into our lives. And it's all about the appearance of it. I remember Danielle Laporte, I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but she said something about how these things that we're chasing, instead of thinking about the thing, we need to think about the feeling that we imagine is going to come from that. And we have to start thinking about how can we create those feelings now for us. So if you're looking for intimacy, if you're looking for love, rather than waiting for the one, which is so big for people, and once I find this person, then I'll start being an expression of love. Then I'll start being open. Then I'll start being vulnerable. Then I'll start, seeing people and appreciating them. How can you start doing that in micro ways right now? That is literally saved my spirit. Learning how to be an expression of love outside of having a partner while being single and not waiting. Because I used to wait for everything in my life. I was always waiting for a long distance boyfriend to arrive, for me to overcome my dependencies, all of it. That how can I right now start engaging in the world, engaging with the world in a way that, in the future, I hope to as well. But, it's about not waiting on yourself.
How did you start to find your way out of the heartbreak and the fantasy? What was your stepping stones out of that moment to kind of get back to yourself?
One, it was, making a promise to myself, really, really making kind of a vow. And it's been different over time, but, let's just say coming out of the relationship where I lost all that weight, it's done. Telling the person I've done everything I can and you will not hear from me again, and keeping that promise this time. It was also, looking at my environment. Where do I want to be? I know that my environment really helps me. Another thing was I started looking at Uber drivers as spiritual guides rather than waiting for a therapist and just relying on this one person. Yeah. And this, this professional, rather than waiting for a professional to dish everything to. The beginning of what I do everywhere in life now is I looked at Uber drivers as my spiritual guides, and I spoke to them in a way that they were enlightened, and they had something like I was meant to sit in this car and share this time together. And I'm telling you, it started there. It was this short interaction. I was being in transit. I always loved being in transit. And I started feeling, whoa, that burst of connection. It got me to the next day. It got me to the next day, and I started counting on that. And now, I speak to everyone, everywhere I'm going. I give compliments I love New York for that reason. New York just became this place where I started, interjecting a bit in life. I started noticing people and saying something to someone, but it started with Uber drivers. And, and then, another part was I knew that I was dependent on Adderall. And it was the vow to stop that. And there were massive things that came from me after that. I felt like every time where I've really taken a stance for myself, the world has rewarded me. So, yeah.
I love that. I love that sentiment. I think it's hard to make that initial step, especially from an addiction perspective. It's hard for you to release that because, there's going to be parts of you I would have thought that can, it's thinking, how am I going to ever get over this? But at the same time, you've got another part of you saying you must take that step. And it's, I can imagine it's quite a confusing, conflicting time. And like you said, it doesn't just happen overnight. I would have thought this is now the journey that you're on.
My decisions happened overnight, finally deciding. I know that some people taper off things. I'm so much more of an extremist than that. But it was a terrifying part in my life because Adderall became this thing where, one, it started off as this secret companion during my loneliness. That, okay, I don't know people. I feel so unlike myself that I'm waiting on myself to get better to join the world again. So while I'm waiting to get better, maybe becoming super productive will make me feel high value about myself. And instead of joining the world, I just became addicted to being productive at my desk. And I was really scared. It had become so much of my identity, being a writer. I was in a PhD program at the time. I couldn't fathom, not having Adderall. I thought I got in because of the Adderall. So it was so much, I didn't know where my true talent and my true thoughts anymore, stopped with the Adderall, and I began. But I also knew that it became so bad And I always have heard this voice inside of myself telling me what I need to do. And it's taken a long time at times to listen to it. And I said, it's worth it in this moment to try to see if that voice is right. And if it's not, I can go back to something. But I know that I will feel love toward myself if I try this. You know, it becomes about that relationship with yourself. Like, I hate myself for what I'm hiding. I hate myself for dependencies, for not stopping things sooner that are destroying me. And so a way of, again, like parenting yourself is just listening to that inner voice that says, like, this could really help you. Like, start listening to that voice that says this could help you. And have, and it's having this curious mind about what if it does? And it's been like so much of that. I mean, I've had to, because I, have been on this journey of starting my own practice and having clients and then having this podcast. I've done really humbling, in my mind, really humbling jobs along the way. As I've built, a clientele. Yeah. And rather than identifying so strongly with what these humbling jobs are, just thinking, hey, this could help me, and get curious about how that thing, becoming a background actor, doing some catering, becoming a brand ambassador, rather than these things are humiliating to me, how can they help me, become more human? I swear to God, these things have helped me become more human and relate to the everyday person. Back to the Uber driver. How can I, step into a role that I allow myself to engage with the everyday person? Or
it's so grounding by the sounds of it as well. It's a grounding experience to use community to help you become closer to who you are, rather than always needing to sit in a room and sometimes do the work. It's getting out into the world and talking to other people and listening and engaging.
Yeah, I think it's, we can absorb so much knowledge, right? And it all becomes theory. When I'm sitting and reading, I love what I'm taking in, but I have to put it into practice or I'll never believe that I'm becoming anything different. And what all these other roles, helped me with is, like, when I started the podcast, I broke up with my boyfriend, and I also started doing background acting. And again, going back to, like, being uncomfortable in the world, I had to really come into myself. I found ways to having to drop down into my body, having to show up and be a certain way. And that's what was so huge for me, that in order to become anything more, I had to start being that. And that's where the true transformation happened, is that it's not me just thinking I'm going to be like this. It's seeing myself, endeavor to be that.
And what did you find out about yourself during those challenging growth times in your life?
From helping myself, or from actually within the challenge?
From helping yourself from going through the challenges. Did you learn more about yourself that you hadn't realized before, in the depths of change, when growth can sometimes feel so painful and actually we start to retract from it and maybe we avoid it because we can't see results quick enough, or we don't feel any different to straight away, and we are already really a society of quick results and instant gratification. So, your journey of becoming and going through those changes, what did you learn about yourself, and how did you kind of stay on this new path that you found yourself on?
I learned in a way that, I've been right inside that voice about the things that would help me. It was right. I realized that I am bigger than the sadness. I'm not just that. I used to feel like if I walked out into the world and I was enjoying myself, but if I came home and I was sad, that was out of integrity. So I might as well just be sad all the time. And then I started seeing, wait, I'm two things. I really am. I'm someone that's deeply connected as I'm on this challenging journey. And I'm so proud of myself now that I can be someone that's exuberant, that I'm someone that, I had forgotten how to laugh. I went, a few years and I really thought I would never smile again. And now so much of me, so much of me is like, I'm out in the world and people think I'm a stand-up comedian. And it's like, oh my God, I remember when I totally forgot that I even made people laugh. So what I've seen is that, as I'm becoming and as I'm still like overcoming and working on myself, I'm able to genuinely engage people and I'm able to be the light. A lot of people, it's very strange. I have it on my wrist, be the light. During the pandemic, I bought this and it became, my mantra. And people have started saying that to me. Like, they'll be like, you're the light on this street. And it's just like, oh my God. Yet I talk and I experience darkness. And I realize that the reason I've become so much more alive, so much more of this full expression in someone that is noticed in the world, because I've gotten closer and closer to the things that hurt, to talking to people about what really matters or what gets hidden away. So the less I hide, the more visible I become, but it's in a good way. It's in a good way. And I think that's what I've noticed about myself. And, just being resilient. I think I've also realized that bravery can be heartbreaking. I didn't know that. I've become so much braver. I have made choices that I always wanted to make sooner, ending a relationship sooner, for example. And that is so empowering for me to see that I can do that. But there's also heartbreak that comes with that. I've realized that it's heartbreaking to walk away and outgrow who you used to be and who you used to rely on being that story. For some reason, it's like all we want is to change our story. And yet we resist to change it so much.
Yes.
So
that's so true. And I think relationships can often be big markers in our life to those new chapters and the evolution of ourselves and growing out of somebody else, just like we can grow out of ourselves, really, and ready to move on to the next chapter. But it's maybe, and I don't know how you see it in your profession, but, this idea that we're all quite still stuck in society that says we should get to a certain age, settle down, have children, get married, and tick, tick, tick. You are now deemed successful. Well done. Off you go and enjoy the rest of your life, despite the fact that you may be in a relationship where you are completely miserable, or you haven't evolved enough in the relationship and you're stifled in it, or maybe you've evolved out of it. That's when the challenges come, because actually that goes against where society is telling us, whether we're reading a magazine, watching a film, TV program, it's pretty much the same type of routine that we see. And it can be, and it is without a doubt, especially for women who want children and how that plays out, it can really force your hand on the decision-making process in a romantic relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I'm someone that has always wanted children. I can't think of something that would be like, just what an honor. What an honor. But I haven't lived my life in a way that's, prioritizing that or making that happen on a timeline. I mean, I'm 35 years old and I haven't been in love in quite a few years. And yeah, I think one of the most challenging things for people is how to celebrate where other people are and the quote unquote wins or, that they're experiencing when we aren't winning in that way. And I think that when we see that, and it's wild actually about people is, people really will ask if you're single or if you're not engaged yet, or if people are concerned. They talk to you like they're concerned. How can I help you get beyond this? No one thinks about the strength of not choosing yet. What if she's not settling for something anymore? What if she believes that she has something so special to offer? She's looking for someone special. Any of the number of the things. people don't really become curious about what you are doing and what you do have. They focus on what you don't have. And as a result of that, we become ashamed of that. And we try to fix that by getting something right now. If it's, you can't have kids, it's like this, there's like this obsession, I got to freeze my eggs. Or, I talk to so many people and they come to me and they're like, this person is going to be my husband. They're the one. I'm like, could they even be your boyfriend yet? You get so excited about,
Take a step back.
Get so excited about the marriage that they don't even think about, how to inspire love in someone. They're done with people asking about kids. They just want kids, but I've never seen them hold a child in their life or, get down on their knees and to inspire joy in someone. The most helpful thing to me and the most heartbreaking thing, this was just wild, is I ended up dating someone. He actually wrote into my advice column, and he had 2 children. I never thought I would date someone with children. I thought I could only love children of my own. And I ended up, falling in love with 3 people, him and his 2 children. And I saw something in myself that I always was trying to access, is presence. It was presence. It was playfulness. Things that I had chased down with drugs, Adderall to make me more present. It's like I had that with being in front of a child. And so I know how special and how much I loved that year plus of my life. But I also know that I don't want to do this with just anyone. People leave each other very easily these days. Co-parenting is trending, but it's a hard journey. And I've seen that a lot from my profession and from the podcast, that it's just a hard thing to want something for yourself, but also to place all the significance around it where you take it so seriously that you want to make sure that you're really making the right choice and not just a selfish choice or a rush choice. Because, oh my God, time is running out, or people keep asking me about this, or maybe my life would really begin if I have this.
It's almost like we still need to be educated around that to be able to even help one another, even if you're in a happy relationship or a marriage, to at least be aware of friends around you and how to communicate effectively, because so often the communication comes in the form of, oh, you'll find somebody. And like you just said, maybe that person doesn't want to and they are quite happy.
Yeah, or just like you'll find somebody. It's just as like find yourself. I mean, it's not a scavenger hunt through life to find, the missing piece. I mean, that line, you'll find someone. It just is like, it just underscores that something's missing, and people internalize that. People internalize that something's still wrong. Something's still wrong. And, through my clients, I've learned just how much they can become chameleons in order to have a relationship.
Yes.
You want to talk about something terrifying, is that, you're trying to find someone and then you become a chameleon for them, and then you have to go find yourself afterwards and you've totally forgotten who you are.
Yeah. And then we're 10 years down the line and we're just starting the journey.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, when you talk about being a chameleon, it's something, so many of us can relate to in our relationships at times. And it's this notion of fitting in and maybe not respecting yourself enough, that if I just do this thing, then I'll be able to keep hold of the relationship, or I'll be able to be protected because, I might not love that person romantically, but they do other things in the relationship that I can't do without. And it becomes even more complex in those situations.
This is such a big one. I've never considered myself a chameleon. I've always taken great pride in not being that. My superlative in high school was most unique. When everyone zigs, I zag. And yet, what I've realized that I did in the past, and, you really have to I have to really stand up for myself now, is not trying to adjust to the comfort level of someone else, not trying to adjust to where someone else is at. Because if you were actually speaking and if you were to, just be transparent about what you're ready for or the dynamic that you want, that might seem like too much. I think that scares a lot of women, especially. You don't want to be too much. Oh my God, it's too much intensity. Oh my God, look how she, wants to give to me. And it's like, wait a second, it really started hitting me. Why is that a liability? I'm too much, it's like that's a strength rather than, burying that and hoping that in time, again, in the future, someone will be ready for us. Why not show what we're ready for so we can honor? It's all about honoring ourselves and where we're really at. And if someone can't match that, the truth is they probably won't ever. Because how you start something is how you continue it. So, disguising who you really are just doesn't work. And I went to meet someone that came on my podcast, actually, and I was in a really dark place and I didn't want to be on the apps. And I put my app on LA. And I said I was looking for guys to come on my podcast. And the first guy that came on never stopped talking to me. And oh my God, the questions he asked me, I hadn't had someone ask me questions in so long. Like as a host, I feel like I'm always asking the questions. I feel like I go out on dates with guys and they want breakup advice. And it's just like wild. So I did something different. I didn't make him my world from a distance, but it contributed to, my blossoming. He was, present during a time where I really started to heal. And so when I went and met him, I was met with a lot of the realities of who he really is. And just us coming together, I think him even seeing who I am. And it was big, and he was uncomfortable with that because he's actually, much more introverted, and it made him uncomfortable. And in the past, I used to always date guys that were that way. And so I would become smaller because I wanted to keep them where I felt, oh my God, look what they did for me. They were showing up for me to, I can't just take, I have to give back, so I would adjust to them. I would adjust to their comfort level, believing over time it will change. And this time I was like, no, I went in the opposite direction. I mean, this is as small as I'm willing to be. And if this is too big for you, it will never work. Because I mean this. Right now is as small as I'm willing to be. So that was really big for me to walk away from things I would have said yes to in the past.
Would you have felt guilty about walking away in the past, that you had somehow let them down?
Yeah, and I would have felt guilty, but I also would have felt afraid for myself, afraid of, well, who's going to ask me the questions next? Wait, why do I have to end it? I can just adjust to it and reframe my mind around it and keep them around. And, a lot of people do this is like they'll entertain something and then start observing other people so they can jump from one thing to the next. So they're never really without. So I would have been not only feeling guilty, I would have been afraid for myself that I can't possibly walk away from this because, well, maybe he's been the thing that's contributing to my sadness. In fact, I became worried about that. I was supposed to go on the trip in July. I wanted to be out there for my birthday. And I just felt like something's not going to go right here. Something is off. And I was nervous that I was going to fall into heartbreak again. So I started preparing myself for the possibility that this is not what I thought it could be. And that preparation and that just becoming realistic about things rather than romanticizing everything prepared me to be able to see things for what they are and walk away and realize, wait, no, this was because of me. The reality is he asked me questions, but I was the one answering the questions. So it was me. It was both of us. But and I just saw for myself, I didn't reach any depths of sadness. I've got my own back now. And I think that there's a certain sense of freedom, and there is a rush that comes with doing what you know is right for yourself, choosing to be brave rather than, afraid.
And that takes so much confidence, takes so much guts. It takes a lot of support to feel that in those moments. Have you learned anything about yourself in those moments when you've been in those relationships where you've been a chameleon, or where you've sat in a relationship and you knew you didn't want to be in it, but you didn't know how to get out? Through your heartbreak coaching and all the exercises that you've done, are there any values that you can share, or maybe even like questions that you can share that people listening could think about and reflect on? And is there anything that you've really sort of pulled out that's actually, how do you self-check in with, with yourself? What's the kind of conversation you need to start having?
One thing is, for example, like when the guy that I was just talking about, here, I'll make it a little bit clearer. We're going out on a date and he's late to the date. And in the past, I could never handle that. I would have personalized it so much. And this time I'm like, wow, I've prepared myself. I can talk to people. I'm going to talk to people. This is my life. How can I be the main character of my life? How can I turn this into something for myself? So he would finally arrive and I'd be talking to people and he would be like, oh my God, you really do make friends everywhere you go. And he was just like, intimidated by that. So the question then becomes like, after questions like that, or questions like someone might say things to you, ask yourself, how does your body, or how do you respond to that? Are you shutting down? If someone asks you something or says something and you feel like, oh my God, I'm opening, they actually want to know me better, then it will make you feel more open. If it starts to close you down, then that's a sign that someone is trying to get you to be smaller, minimizing you. There's an uncomfortable dynamic, right? So I think that that's one way, is that, another guy I was dating, he said something like, oh my God, I got to figure out the situation that makes you uncomfortable. Nothing makes you uncomfortable. And rather than providing excuses for what that sounded like, like, why would someone want to see me uncomfortable? So I think that, and then another thing is, it's like being able to have the conversations with people about the things that kind of threw you off, being able to revisit that. Rather than looking at this person as the person you're going to love, could you look at it and say, what am I meant to learn from them? What are they bringing out in me? How are they adding, how are they bringing out certain qualities? So like everyone that comes into our life is encouraging something out of us, and trying to pinpoint what that is. Asking yourself, what was I looking for specifically? Where was I at when I met this person? How did I end up saying yes to them? Because we forget that. And maybe, as we've gone into the relationship, we've lost track of that, or we've outgrown it. But it's not just looking at where we are right now with someone. It's, who were we? Why did we say yes to them? And then at the end, if we're going to leave them, what might this be an invitation into? If leaving someone is actually, when one door closes, another opens, what could be on the other side of that door? And it's, again, like being curious about that. This is meant to happen. Things are meant to go a certain way, especially when you start paying attention to your intuition and you don't let things just go on forever, and you really start honoring timelines with people. That way that when you release someone, you'll have trust that it was meant to be released, or you were meant to be released. And what could I be moving toward next? And getting excited about that.
I love that. It's such a great way to reframe what can feel like such a heavy situation, that sometimes when you're in those trenches, you never feel like you're going to get out of them alive. And, often during heartbreaks, sleeping gets interrupted. You might drink more, you might start doing drugs, you might not be eating properly. It comes back to the self and how we approach that. And it's refreshing to hear you talk about how heartbreak can affect us in a positive way, because it's so often in the media, especially in the bylines you read in magazines, they're not necessarily, over the history I'm talking, have not really been necessarily effective in those ways. And often the books that you read about dating and how to treat a man, and it sometimes can often put women on the back foot, especially, I think, often it can minimize you because you go back into yourself and think, what did I do wrong?
One of the best things, and it's the hardest thing, because during heartbreak, I think we become afraid of the emotions that we're feeling. I think that also we want to deny that we really feel this way. But the thing that has been most helpful, and it can be scary, is allowing yourself to feel it all. Feel it all. Don't resist it. Let it break your heart. And people that come into our lives, I mean, it's a gift, even if it's heartbreak after, that they're an invitation to feel. And the feelings of sadness or disappointment or confusion are the very things that connect us with people. It's a softness. It keeps us soft. And rather than letting heartbreak harden us, how can we allow it to ground us? How can we allow it to soften us and just make us more aware of how to treat people, and also how to appreciate, how to be discerning, but also really how to appreciate knowing that things don't last forever. And people that are in the midst of dating, I mean, the reality is most people are just passing through our lives. So how can you be present to them now? How can you look at everyone? Maybe it's a trial. Well, what are you trying right now? If you really want to love, how can you be a bigger expression of that? And don't read how other people are doing it. How do you want to do it? What is that going to look like? What is going to be your unique signature? What's going to make you memorable? And lean into that, explore that, cultivate that.
I love what you said just around that in terms of looking at your needs. It's such a great tool to remember that we have ourselves to come back to, and our needs and wants and desires, they're all different from different periods of our life. And we don't always need to be trying to find the one that might not sort of fulfill the need that we have really right in this moment. That might be fulfilling a long-term need. The plan is, one day I'd like to get married and have children, but actually we can reframe our interactions with people to ensure we're in control in those situations, that we get what we need and not necessarily the fantasy of what we're trying to buy into in this distant future that we aren't really living at this point. That's not quite living in the moment, making decisions based on our needs. I remember years ago, sort of over 10 years ago, a therapist said to me, you need to look at dating like a sweet shop. Go in and...
A sweet shop.
Yeah. Pick what you want. What do you fancy? And enjoy it for the moment. You don't need to be, you don't need to have it forever. It was a different way to...
And it's so counter.
Yeah.
It's so counter. But I think that's where the liberation is. I think that's where the liberation is. And again, it's about... Some people really are. It's like one day at a time. How do you keep on choosing people? If you look at it as like, this is just a sweet that I'm going to enjoy for right now, that drops you into the now, that makes you present. I think that when heartbreak is so often, the sadness surrounding the ways that we can't give love anymore. If we're honest with ourselves, if we're in a healthy place, it's not about, we're not receiving love. It's that we can't give it. We feel like we can't be an expression of it. We look back and we say, oh my God, this person granted me permission to have a front row seat to their life, and I didn't maybe honor them enough. I could have said more. I could have, we think about what we didn't do, and it's about remembering that. So when we do it again, we start appreciating it more. We start savoring it. It's like looking at each person, not as if they're forever, but what if they're the last one? I mean, what if you die tomorrow? How do you make it the most passionate kiss now? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And also that's another thing. It's like, don't dull yourself, don't dumb yourself down, don't dim your light. And just, what was hard for me for many years is I was always in my head. And one of the most beautiful things that has happened is really gaining presence with people. And I think that's where the magic is. I think that's where the romance is. I think that's where we lose ourselves in the moment, is really being present for someone, because the reality is it's a gift to be welcomed into someone's world. It really is.
Absolutely.
And people lose track of that as if it should just, no, it's a gift that someone is choosing right now to be with you out of all the people, out of all the choices they could have made. If you met someone on an app, maybe they wouldn't have opened the phone that day, but every choice somehow synced up. And get curious about that. Why them right now?
Have you maintained your curiosity as you've grown through this process of learning more about yourself and heartbreak? Is that need for curiosity still sort of the fire in you as you're sort of starting on this and an ongoing journey, really?
I mean, my dad always taught me to be a lifelong learner, and I say that I'm endlessly fascinated. I think the only thing that has shifted is I started asking myself, who am I letting or entertaining, right? So I used to just be so curious, I could go and sit with anyone and have a conversation and call it a date. But I realized that, who am I dating? And I can be curious about anyone, but I want to be a little bit more specific about romantically who I am giving that part of myself to. I give a lot. I give my attention a lot to people throughout my days. So I want to be more deliberate at this moment in time with who I give my body to and who I give my affection to. I used to kind of just be curious about anyone, and I am in life, but not romantically. And so it's just, I'm on the scenic route.
And is that for you about having boundaries now in terms of your personal growth and how that's then given to somebody else, and making sure that those boundaries are respected on each side and that you're in line with what you're looking for potentially, or not even necessarily looking for, because we don't necessarily always know, but it's that kind of feeling that you're not out there looking for somebody to fill a void anymore. You're actually looking for somebody to be a whole person who's next to you as a whole person for the sort of for your next chapter.
I just don't want to be a part of a disposable society. I don't want to treat people that way. I don't want to be treated that way. And so that's why I'm more intentional. I also know for myself that the people I experience become the stories I tell. And, editing my own podcast for over 245 episodes, I've had to really sit with that. And so I think that's also another part of it, is I don't want to just be entertaining anyone, because they will become the energy I absorb. And I think that it becomes a reflection of ourselves, and that's why I'm more intentional too. Just, I believe looking at myself more as a gift, and also really knowing myself, for example, like sexually, it's like I am a very passionate person and I want to bring that in. I don't want to dull that. And though I've had great casual encounters where I could be present and passionate, I want to just make sure that I am aligning with people in the right way where I can be a full expression of myself in that moment. And, there's a little part of me that's like, I don't want everyone being able to say that, I kissed Chelsea. I don't want everyone to know what that experience is like to sleep with me. And I think I used to just be a little bit more free for all. It's the question of whose energy am I bringing into my life? And I don't want to fake anything. That's another thing. I don't want to just kiss people and just go with it because that's the thing to do. I just can't. I can't do that.
So on this podcast, we do ask a question around the inspiration to your life in terms of, was there a book, a quote, or a piece of art, film, TV program that has ever really resonated with you and sort of stayed with you?
I'll say two. The one movie from when I was a young kid, I saw The Truman Show. I've only seen it once, and it changed my life forever. I believe that, what if people were watching right now? How do I live in integrity? And that has motivated me throughout my whole life, is to be in integrity.
It gives me chills when you say that.
Changed my life. And then the other one is Maya Angelou. People will forget what you did. They will forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. I think sometimes, the Adderall was trying to be a doer, was trying to say things in the perfect way. And I realized what has been, oh my God, the most beautiful thing of my life is like getting my energy back. And people remember how you feel, and that's based on your energy and what you're offering, what you're allowing for. It's about leading by your own example. That's the biggest thing. Lead by your own example.
That's such a true thing to say, but we often just get lost along the way and we forget. So it's such a great reminder to hear you say that. It's leading by example. I'm sure I was told that from a very young age, and
quickly forgot it.
It's been a weird thing. I've never looked at people and been like, I want to be them. I just want to be more of me. I've always just wanted to be more of me.
But that's it, isn't it? Leading by example for yourself, actually, first, before.
You came into this world to be you. And it's dishonoring that invitation into life by trying so hard to be other people or liked by other people. Just be a loving person and let the love find you. Don't go looking for it, trying to be likable. Let it find you, because you're out in the world being yourself and people notice you. And again, don't wait for people. Lead by example. Be the person that says something first. Put yourself out there.
How do you think the role of dating apps and social media has played into that notion of getting out into the world and being truly you?
I mean, I think that it can be an invitation out. So I think it helps, you're also seen by more people. So you're visible in a sense. And, a lot of people, they are working all day. It's like, how do they go on dates? Like, they can't be out in the world. So dating apps is an invitation out into the world. But I also think the trouble with it is that people rely on it so heavily that they forget about the beauty and the magic and the synchronicity of being out in the world. And again, every choice that you've ever made and someone else has ever made has led you to this moment where someone is standing in front of you. And how can you just engage in that? How can you make a moment? My biggest thing is initiate an experience. So I think that the opportunity that's being lost and people's dependency on social media and dating apps is that they use that and they think that's the only invitation, but they're in life. And I think that with social media, I've never understood the highlight reel. I think that for a lot of people, on dating apps, people go to their Instagram. And so there's concern about how does their life look. I go in the opposite direction. Again, when everyone zag, I've always just spoken more about what it's like, I think, to be human. Just social media and dating apps too, it can just not really be honoring and a true indication of who you are in an intimate way. And so I would just say that, it was really cool actually to put my hinge on LA and to say that I was looking for guys to come on the podcast and to have a different sort of profile, because I started really bringing in different types of guys. And it was, much more based in intimacy and the reality of their experiences, which so often is, people don't expose those things when they go on dates. Again, they're trying so hard to be liked and they're waiting till the future. They tell people little things here and there, but they don't know how to really just come in and be themselves.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I remember when I was on the dating app, I was on Hinge and I was on a date with this chap who we had one drink and it was only very early, like 7:30 in the evening. And I suggested that a friend of mine was doing a little DJ set at a restaurant down the road, which would have been nice to sort of very relaxed, very informal, just to pop along to. And he explicitly sort of told me that was what he did when he was younger. He's a grown up now. He doesn't almost go out and have fun or enjoy himself. He's looking for something serious. And I was blown away by it because actually, I've heard it with a few other dates I've been on where the guy, for me, felt like they had started to play the female role, stereotypical of I want to settle down. And part of that notion is we go through these tick boxes where, have a conversation. I'm looking, essentially looking for a wife and having fun, going out into the world, just being spontaneous. That's what we used to do when we were younger. We don't do that now. And I was hit between the eyes. It was like, wow, I thought this would be something that it's fun and spontaneous. And that's what I hold dear, especially at the start of a relationship, is this idea of, having fun. And, life is going to get so serious. If we can't ever come back to fun and laughter, then it's going to be a very intense experience to be with somebody like that. However, I can see in some respects where he was trying to come from. It was out of his realms. And I experienced it with a few guys. And what I mean is when I say stereotypical for women, because I think a lot of women who want children, the clocks are ticking, and then there's a pressure there to kind of like grow up quickly. And that means being serious, maybe not being as spontaneous, maybe not going out as much, maybe just sort of finding the man and settling down. And I found quite a few men actually really surprised me with their approach.
Yes, I've experienced the same. I think one is like men want to make sure that they're being taken seriously. And I think that dating apps, sometimes it can feel like for men that they're just, a side piece, or someone's just looking for entertainment, or, oh my God, this person just has friends, any of those things. So I think that there's just a defensive-ness about it. But then there's this irony, because I speak with so many men, and so many of my clients are men, that, they continue to follow dating someone. They continue forward if the person is fun, if they're having fun. And I've had a lot, and remember, I used to be so depressed. So fun to me, I wasn't that person anymore. And men really see me as the fun girl. And that has worked against me. I've seen a lot. They're surprised by my seriousness, by some of my traditional values, and yet they want someone that's fun. I think romance is about spontaneity. So it's confusing, and that's why you have to like not try to be figuring someone else out. If someone puts up a roadblock and they say no to it, it's a filtering out system. And again, thank God they weren't being a chameleon and acting like they were in something and then telling you later down the line, like, I don't want to do that anymore. I've seen a lot of that. There's a lot of people that someone wanted to have fun. A guy really, really wanted to have fun, and the woman played along with it. But that's not who she is. She's a hermit. And now it's a massive problem after, 6 years in a relationship. Again, it's about being able to speak on behalf of yourself. We have certain behaviors that can be fun. We have certain things that we might want to do, and we want someone to join us. But it's also being able to speak and give context to that. I'm inviting you out to this for this reason. I thought this might be fun because of this, And if someone can't hang with that, you have to just think, see it as, wow, someone, for whatever reason, they see value in being able to tell me where they're really at, who they really are. Yeah. Or the world is giving me this opportunity to say no thanks to that, or you know what, that won't work for me. And thank God you were honoring yourself by taking the lead and putting it out there. And the hard thing about your story is that some people would never make an invite or come up with a suggestion again. And again, it goes back to like men always dictating where you go. Guys would punt the ball back to me and have me figure out where we're going. So I just started taking them to Soho House all the time. Well, all of them responded differently to Soho House. Some of them, really judged it, all these things. But what was great for me is the environment didn't change. And I got to see, what I really felt with someone. And I also got to see how they might judge or respond to something that's in my world that
It's interesting how your environment and your values can change often the perception and the judgment somebody then has in those moments. Getting really straight on your values is probably, and it feels like it's quite crucial, especially within this context of dating and breakups, and finding out who you are is getting really firm on what your values are. Because if you were to, suggest something and it was met with a no, I guess if you're going back to your values, you don't fall into that trap so much of, what have I done wrong? Oh, I shouldn't have brought him here. I shouldn't have taken him. That was silly of me. I knew that wouldn't work. It's that feeling again that you're trying to avoid.
100%. I think that we end up questioning ourselves and saying that we did it wrong. But in fact, it's like we were honoring ourselves, and we're actually taking ourselves closer to what we want. So it's not about punishing ourselves when we're actually getting what we want. If we speak if we're saying, again, going to your, I want to go to a DJ set and that's what you want to do, and someone says no, and, they see their way out, you're actually getting closer to what you want. Going with someone that doesn't really want to be there is actually taking you further away. It's leading you into, self-deception and stuff. So yeah, it's really hard. You can circling back, and I felt this, why did I have to say something? Why did I have to, speak about my values? Why did I have to start honoring my values? And it's like, because I'm become someone that can't afford to have it any other way, and celebrate that. You know what I started doing? I started taking myself to my favorite restaurant, sitting at the bar, and every time I lost something, I started celebrating, believing that it was actually getting me closer to where I want to see myself and honoring myself.
I absolutely love that. I mean, one thing I like to do, I don't mind walking into a restaurant or a bar or a pub, like we have in the UK, lots of pubs everywhere. I don't mind walking in on my own and sitting there. I think I haven't done that for a long time. You know, things take over and the environment starts to stay a bit the same because, you know, I'm a certain age and certain points of life, and I'm very aware of something, even in my sort of 5-day week, that I do need that variety, and it's so important. And so often I can see how I slip back into what I would describe as a normal way of life, of what people are supposed to do in life is get up, work, go to sleep, eat, and repeat. And it's really hard to notice that sometimes, to really say that, you know, your environment really does affect you and plays a part. And secondly, to go and put yourself in those situations and almost like celebrate those moments that we're not really taught to celebrate. You know, it's such a juxtaposition of everything that maybe our habits would tell us.
I just think that, you know, doing the opposite is ultimately what leads to heartbreak. You know, it extends that. It's where we lose ourselves, where we begin pulling away from the world. I heard something yesterday. It was like one more conversation. It was just talking about one more thing that you do. So if you go to sit at the bar, that one move could be the very thing that changes your life. And again, going back to curiosity, could that be a thing? But it also changes, it impacts our well-being. It impacts our idea of ourselves. You know, if we're constantly like the hamster on the wheel doing the same thing, we might think of ourselves as a boring person or all that. But by doing something that deviates from our norm, it reminds us that we're capable of adapting. We're capable of trying to welcome ourselves into something different. And it only has to be that one time. And sometimes, you know, one time sitting at the bar, you know, it goes a long way. It's back to the Uber drivers. One conversation, you know, was enough for me to keep on moving into the week. And again, but it's about appreciating and honoring and celebrating that one thing. You know, often we can sit at a bar and, you know, if something doesn't happen, you know, if someone doesn't buy us a drink, it's a failed experience. And it's like, what are you doing that is worthy of celebrating? I remember I sat at this bar, I wrote my family and I said, you know, I was celebrating, and my dad goes, great, pick up the bill. And I was like, no one else is with me. Who else would pick up the bill? He thought I was out celebrating with friends. And I was like, no, I'm alone. But a guy ended up, the bar was packed, started cleaning out. A guy ends up sitting next to me at the bar, and we ended up celebrating together. And it was an incredible conversation. And then he listened to my podcast, and he went to an old episode, really old, like in the hundreds, and told me what he felt about it. And it made me, and this is the thing, this guy was a married man, so it's not necessarily about pursuing anything, or it's not about pursuing anything with him, but it was about, he told me this episode, and what if I was supposed to be in touch with him, because I listened to the episode he was listening to, and I recalled all this pride I had about what I've been working on for so long, but the message that guest gave me was relevant to the moment that I was in, and was the very thing I needed to hear to grow beyond where I was. So it's like,
you've given me goosebumps. You've given me goosebumps, and you will be the message that somebody else listening will no doubt need to hear. We have one last question on this podcast, which is, what does becoming more human mean to you?
I think becoming more human is becoming more universal. I think becoming more human is becoming more similar. You know, I think it's about experiencing a range of emotions, often things that we don't want to feel, and realizing that being human rather than being a superstar is what gives us access to the majority. And it's something that often humbles us, but in that humility, we're able to honor the experience experiences of our life, and we're able to, root for ourselves. Becoming more human has, for me, made me a larger expression of love and appreciation. I've become more human in the last years, but I don't have the things that I thought I needed in order to have joy, in order to dream big, in order to appreciate myself. I don't have the things that I thought I needed in order for other people to value me. Like I thought I needed a PhD. I thought I needed, love and all these things, more money. I've become more human in a sense that it's become less about that, and it's become more about the connection. So I think becoming more human is about becoming more connected.
I absolutely love that message. Thank you so, so much. It's been a complete honor to have you on today, Chelsea, and for you to share your story with us. And to everybody that's listening, it's been such a delight. And I feel like we could talk for hours on this subject matter. It's truly a wildly big connection that we all have to this subject. And it's without doubt, the key message that I'm really taking away with me is just really understanding who we are, who each individual person is, before we try and enter into relationships and guessing who we are through somebody else, and really making sure we do the work on ourselves fundamentally. So it's been, an absolute joy. Thank you so, so much.
Of course. I love it. I love being able to, again, have like a human conversation. And anytime you want to talk more, but thank you for the opportunity to, just express in a way what's been happening behind the scenes. And, it is about figuring out who we are, but that's an ever-evolving process as well. And it's just about honoring where you're at now and celebrating, yourself, and knowing there's value in this exact moment of where you're at, even if the circumstances aren't what you dreamed of. The more that we can see where we're at and appreciate it, I think the sooner we can move through it.
I'm Francesca Donnellan, and you've been listening to Becoming More Human, the podcast. You can follow Becoming More Human on Instagram, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your podcast apps, such as Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and Google. And don't forget to check out our website for exclusive audio content on becomingmorehuman.co.uk. Join me next week for another inspiring conversation. Thank you for listening.